My name's Emma Taylor. I'm founder and managing director of Chief Disruptor. It's wonderful to have you with us for our latest webinar. We as a community focus very much on supporting disruptive business and technology leaders, and we've been lucky enough to do so for the last 21 years across all industry sectors. A huge amount of change has happened during that period of time. Many different emerging technologies coming through, some succeeding, some struggling, some failing. And it's a really tricky time for many, many business leaders. As we know, 5 years ago, now nearly 6 years ago, COVID struck, and that then changed the game for many different boardrooms again. The world has never really been the same since then. And today we're going to be talking about the hybrid boardroom. Humans, data, and AI agents in strategic decisions. This is going to be an hour long, and we're going to really deep dive into a number of the topics that are affecting the hybrid boardroom. Humans, data, AI agents, strategic decisions, all what we're focusing on today. Boards can no longer debate whether using AI in decision-making is a need or a must or a requirement, but how can they trust, govern, and integrate it effectively into their organizations? As AI agents move from dashboards to decision influence, leadership teams face a new strategic reality. Algorithms can detect patterns at scale, data platforms deliver real-time foresight, and AI agents can recommend, simulate, and optimize. But strategy is still shaped by judgment, risk appetite, ethics, and long-term vision. The competitive edge no longer lies in more data, it lies in mastering the hybrid decision model, where human intuition, governance, and AI intelligence work is structured collaboration. Today, we're joined by leaders operating at the intersection of financial stability, market infrastructure, and AI-driven sustainable procurement. From the Bank of England, where strategy, architecture, and governance underpin financial stability and public trust. From the London Stock Exchange Group, where data architecture and AI decisions carry systemic financial risk. And from Unibloom, where AI agents are already shaping operational ESG decisions in real time. So different sectors, different risk profiles, and different operating models. We're lucky enough today to have these leaders with us, and I'm going to ask them shortly to introduce themselves. We're very lucky to have known all of them for some time, and we're very grateful indeed for their time today. Anna is the CEO and founder of Unibloom, has been doing this for some time. We've also got Lars, who is the principal enterprise architect from London Stock Exchange Group, and also Alexander, who's the head of strategy and architecture for the Bank of England. So wonderful to have you all with us today. We're going to cover a number of topics. We've got 12 different topics, subtopics that we're going to be covering today. I'm going to be coming to some of you for particular questions, and indeed to all of you for a number of them, but we're really grateful indeed for your time. I'm going to ask everyone, if they don't mind, to do a little bit of an overview about themselves, their experiences, and also their current organisation. So I'm going to come to Lars first of all, please, and a little bit about your experience. Please do come off mute if you are.
Thank you, Emma. Yeah, so I've been in IT a bit more than 35 years. First 15, 16 years in business intelligence and management information systems. Then I've been in roles like Chief Architect for Business Intelligence and Data Integration across Deutsche Bank. I've been in HPC and so on. And now I am in London Stock Exchange as Principal Enterprise Architect across real-time. So we are providing most banks, asset managers, funds, etc., with information about financial instruments. And this is happening both in near real-time or in products through which they can analyze information, often now through using information that has been enhanced using AIs to, yes. And I'm quite an innovator, so I like to be on the forefront and do things that hasn't been done before. And nowadays, AI is taking up 80% of my time.
Incredible, isn't it? And it's lovely to have you with us, Lars. We've known each other for a very long time, so thank you very much indeed. Alexander, I'm going to come to you representing all the work that you do in strategy and architecture. Over to you, please.
Yeah, sure. So as said, I kind of lead up the strategy and architecture function for the Bank of England. So kind of career-wise, I've been within consumer finance, kind of multinational insurance, kind of private healthcare, social care, in a number of countries globally, all of which are in very kind of regulated environments, all of which are kind of very dependent on the data space. And the role of the Bank of England, the bank itself providing monetary policy, obviously things like setting the interest rates, for which people will probably know the bank best. There's financial stability, there is the Prudential Regulatory Authority. We have our kind of real-time kind of payment system, which actually supports the UK economy as well. There's a very diverse range of kind of services across the bank. And I have the privilege of looking after the technology strategy for the organisation, as well as the kind of key architectural decisions and architectural governance across our multi-years of transformation that always, as with most organisations, are continuously happening. So transforming is now the norm, I think, rather than the exception. And that's a lot of what my time effort is involved in.
Thank you so much. And I think we talked about digital transformation, didn't we? So back in 2012 or so, now very much business transformation that we're dealing with. And Unibloom, a really fascinating organisation, and Anna, a huge amount of history that you have and experience you have. Please, can I hand over to you, please?
Hi, Emma. Thank you for bringing me into this room. I'm Anna, and I have 30 years also from everything from fintech when I started in the late 90s to see how we automate a Black-Scholes model online to make that traders, automate things and make decisions very quickly. Spend over 20 years at Volvo, Unilever, Ben Jerry's, but also in gold exploration in Russia. So wide range of kind of operating models I've seen and learned. But one of the core things here is that I founded Unibloom 3 years ago in London, and with the vision that every single procurement teams need to have the data on hands, and that's not just cost data nowadays, it's also climate data to make the right decision towards our future. And that's way too complex, and it just sits in one department today with sustainability. And with the AI agents, together with better data, we can provide those decisions in a much better way and improve 2 years of complex guessworking and, calculations to seconds or minutes of getting different options to decide upon. So I'm very excited. I'm driven by efficiency in organizations. I think we're way too inefficient. I believe that AI in the right way can be applied together with better data in those. Together with, of course, we need to transform our operations in a much more sustainable way. And sustainable, we'll talk about both. We're talking about climate and people, and we talk about sustainable businesses, like having that growth mindset and profitability over a long time. So it really goes hand in hand. I'm very excited to, join this group here today.
Thank you very much indeed. So I'm going to come to Alexander first of all. 3 to 5 years from now, what will separate organizations that are truly AI native from those that simply automated their dashboards? What are your views on that one?
So I'll very much kind of offer my personal views rather than the views of the bank itself. I think a lot of it is quite simply going to be down to leadership literacy, providing some of that distinction. The boards and C-suites that get informed will make better decisions, right? And AI is a very acute and very current version of that, but that's always been the case. We will inevitably see insurgents making a mark. Even a very informed board and C-suite of an incumbent will know that it kind of takes time to turn the tankers around sometimes. But I think there is a difference here where we have hyperscalers kind of dominating a lot of AI utility, present in almost all incumbents, I would expect. Large organizations are not at a knowledge disadvantage. And it might be less disruptive than people think. And that kind of creative destruction, to coin the term, will probably likely follow a similar path to shifts we've seen in maybe other kind of historical computing paradigms. But ultimately, it's, have you got your eye on the ball as a C-suite and as a board? And are you keeping informed? And are you exploring? And are you investing? And can you weather the storm, right? And for a lot of incumbents, that should be doable. And they aren't at maybe the disadvantage that sometimes it probably seems with a lot of new technology paradigms as they emerge.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Lars, you mentioned that 80% of your time being focused on AI now. So if we're looking 3 to 5 years from now, what will separate those organizations that are truly AI native from those that simply are just automating?
I think it is about, first it's my private view, same as Alexander. And I believe that this is not a typical hype, so to say. This is something that fundamentally will change how we design our processes, how we work as humans in when we're talking about businesses, and also the market for, so to say, the labor market. But I think that we will, to a very high degree, use AI, but we will also have come to the conclusion that we can't trust AI. And hopefully we have realized that earlier than we typically do, so that we start building processes where we can verify the thinking that, so to say, the AI engine has done. So we don't start making uninformed decisions, because I have found myself that if you trust AI too much, you, so to say, dumb down your brain a bit, because you start relying upon AI to provide the right answers here, and you don't verify them. So I think we will be in a state where, I might have lost the thread a bit here, excuse me for that, but I think we will be in a state where decisions have been taken much faster than today, and the businesses who really thrive are the ones that can utilize AI in the best possible way, because it's not crystal clear, and I think there's a risk for many businesses to fall into get into trouble because they trust AI too much.
Yes, understood. And then looking at all the governance that sits around it. Anna, from your perspective, obviously across industry experience, and now with the work that you're doing at Unibloom, you're also then looking across different sectors again. Where are you seeing those organizations that are going to win, so to speak, or at least grow in a very volatile world?
First of all, I know, and I heard from over 200 different organizations the last few months, that the leadership were waiting for them to give us the guidance, right? I was like, the guidance, just start experimenting. But I don't know what I can use and when I can use it and how, what kind of information there. So I think like very easily now, start giving some guardrails to the organization, say, let's try this, but don't put up the most sensible, information there, right? Secondly, it's about, we are operating on a different level of prompting and interpretation rather than like real decision support. So it's really about just going beyond this prompting, which just takes more time. We all have done it, like we're prompting and realize like half an hour gone, and have you really got to these answers? So the answers and like the organizations become truly AI native. I think there are two things they do differently. First, they will build the foundational trusted and structured decision data. And that's important, but you can't maybe build all of that yourself. You might have to buy in some data because you can't get it all from suppliers, different operations and getting all these cost and emission factors, for example, that we provide them with. Secondly, it's about this, beyond this prompting. So really using forward, AI agents and helping that to kind of build the system, what you can get the help with and where you can get that help from the decision itself. So just the answering, but also identifying the right questions that you need to provide into the agents. So it's that kind of transformation that we need to see. And these are kind of where the companies need to start. I said like to every single one, get started on some really AI agents from some companies that you trust that have solved a small problem on a specific team. For example, in procurement, or for example, in innovation, like what's the hardest problem they feel like they're spending a lot of time of today? And then start there with a small thing, solve that, do that in a sprint, and so on. So I think, that's where we will see that the ones that in, 3 years don't think it's just a dashboard or like continue to just prompting and getting even more information overload. But the ones that say this is a decision-making tool, this is a help on our way there, optimize what kind of information we need to drill down to be able to make decisions, collaboration, and innovations faster.
Thank you very much indeed. And I think you've started to touch on that, Anna, in what you've talked about in terms of what I'd like to look at now, which is what does a genuinely hybrid human and AI decision system look like at board level? in terms of power and accountability and speed, because to achieve all those three is tricky. So what does that generally hybrid decision system look like? Can I come back to you, Anna, just on your thoughts there?
And I sketched it up, so it's hard here, but I would say like the humans need to decide. I wouldn't like, if I sit on a board, if I sit on a leadership team, like I will still be on the control. They can give me the recommendations and do the analysis for me, because that's a lot of waste on time that we know that, you know, machines are better than we are. Even I'm an engineer and I've done very complex calculations, but still we know it takes a lot of time. It's complex to do those. And then, you know, the humans remain those have the accountability. Like we can't, you know, blame or trade. So I would say that it's between those that we should interact much more and see the companions around this. And then the system you want around you should be a continuous learner. So that full interaction where you see that, you know, you can prompt things, oh, did I do the right decision here or not? Then you should have the companions that help you to say, Anna, I know that, you know, last month when you spoke about this in this leadership team meeting or the board meeting, did you really kind of go on the right path? So that's the two things that I would say, that the human decides, AI analyze, and then we're coming back to the accountability for the humans. And then the system in itself, like the agents, can also still to continue to learn, train, and, you know, improve to help you make better decisions, right? If it makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Alexander, obviously with what you do in the world that you work in, risk and all of that is a consideration all the time. Power, accountability, speed, they're an interesting conundrum, I imagine. Could we get your thoughts too in terms of what that decision system could and should look like?
Yeah, I mean, if I think about the waves of kind of outsourcing that have gone on across various industries over the years, there was the old adage that the only thing that you couldn't outsource was governance, right? And I think you can say the same about automation. So I agree with Anna that ultimately there are individuals, either as humans or as committees, who have those final decision rights and must have those final decision rights. I think there's an interesting point that kind of Anna raised, is that when you think about, again, if we think about it as an automation, what you can do in terms of quality, volume, and pace of insight going into those decision-making individuals or groups, you know, can be kind of fundamentally transformed. So definitely the pipeline of things that would normally hit the C-suite or hit the board for decisions, there's much more kind of transformational kind of potential. There's no doubt about that. The element which I think is interesting, and I think it's quite nascent still, is also the point that Anna raised, is that when you're about to make that decision, can you lean into artificial intelligence to help with, you know, validation, to help identify blind spots, right? To when you think about the myriad of forces that might go into a particular decision, which bit have you taken your eye off the ball on, right? Because you're a human. So there's and I'm not trying to kind of plug Microsoft's you know, product suite here, but that kind of co-pilot concept, right? So moving away at the board level from the human in the loop concept that might happen at the operations level to more like an agent in the loop model, where actually you're flipping that paradigm and allowing a validation check, some tire kicking, some, you know, additional scenario testing as those decisions get made. Really kind of bookends that governance element with automation AI capabilities leading into it, and automation AI capabilities, you know, coming out of it, just to make sure that those decisions are valid. So I think that's probably the main shift, is that validation element. The rest of it, I think, is more like traditional kind of automation, power and speed.
Thank you very much. Lars, again, you know, a wealth of experience in terms of where, when, how do we get the power, accountability and speed right, particularly as we are moving at such a pace already?
Yes, it's interesting because we actually about to start building a system which is heavily focused on solving this problem. So we started by looking at using AI, and the vendors most of the vendors that presented the solution for this, or even internal teams, presented solutions which was almost 100% focused on using AI. But we could also see that then created blind spots, as Alexander said, areas where we couldn't see how the AI engine had sort of come to the conclusion. So now we are building a system, or about to start building a system, which is it's a combination of the AI agents looking at the information, creating a concise, structured information set that comes out, so to say, which is then used by another tool, in which we produce logic, we derive information and so on, and then we forward that to the next solution, which is an AI agent then. And this is how we then ensure that we have the right mix of AI and governance, where we can verify how the decision was made. And we can also go back and correct information. If we purely would use AI, that's at least our conclusion, we wouldn't be able to easily go back and sort of say address the problems that the AI caused. So we have to have the right balance there. And I think that is the ideal scenario. I think trusting AI too much is very dangerous. So it needs to be the right combination.
Yeah, thank you very much indeed. Alexander, you spent much of your career turning high-level strategy into operating models and architecture in the era of AI. What fundamentally changes about the translation from ambition to execution, do you think?
So I think it might be less exceptional than might be thought, and it probably is best viewed in the context of eras, right? So if you think about history of computing, you go back a few decades, you've got organizations with lots of client servers, still mainframes. You've got enterprise platforms like ERP, CRM, etc., kind of coming in, early e-commerce, etc. But operating models and architecture, I probably didn't think at the time they were still easy, right? Technology was still at the solution end of business needs. I need a fridge. What fridge should I buy? And then you get to kind of 10 to 20 years ago, and you have the wave of digital marketing, business technologists. Solo-mo was the flavor of the day, if you remember that. And you get early public cloud, mainstream SaaS, etc. And then customers and technology suppliers start setting some of the rules. So tech moves from cost center productivity to value generator. CIOs are at the top table more. So then operating model design has technology now as a driver in that period, not as an afterthought. And architecture starts worrying a lot more about the I in IT, thinking about data quality, but it's still quite transactional, still data really at a primary use level. That was a trickier period because then you need more education, especially executive education required to make the calls. But AI in that period, in its traditional machine learning, computer vision mode in that era, including big and real-time data, it wasn't really problematic. But when we come forward to the AI era today, and kind of go back to what Lars was saying earlier, generative AI specifically, and agents bring a different automation paradigm, and they do need to be thought about differently. They make the IT estate more complex, but managing elements of complexity is what operating model and architecture work is all about. The big difference is they're not as predictable or auditable or guaranteeable in the way that previous generations of tech have been. And it's a very overly simplistic way of looking at it, but they're more like people. They're incredibly good at some things like RAG, right? So your retrieval augmented generation, and they're very fallible in others. And you can sometimes no more predict or understand what's going on inside them than you maybe can in someone's head. And that's the way I think it might want to be thought about in operating model work and architecture. So thinking of your Gen AI instances and use cases a little bit more like people rather than IT. So when would you trust a single person to do the job? Then fine, automate entirely. When would you want 4 eyes or more validation? Then you need a human in the loop. And when the job is too much or maybe not fit for humans, you maybe fundamentally have to question the usage at all. Ultimately, it's changing really, really quickly. But I think when you're looking at operating model or architecture work, AI is really interesting because of those fallibility risks. And I think it probably does maybe look more like a crazily productive person or team than IT in the traditional or predictable way that we've thought about it. So there's no perfect answer, but I think that fallibility and predictability question makes it maybe look more like the human space than it does the IT space, and that needs to be factored into any operating model and architecture work.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because we spend so much time trying to get the technology to actually solve all of the people issues. You've got 24/7. We don't need to worry about someone being sick, etc., etc. We're sort of almost doing a 180 on it, aren't we? In terms of that IT governance and investment strategy, you've done that a lot, Alexander, in highly regulated sectors. As AI systems begin to influence decisions, how should that governance evolve? And also, is it about stronger controls or is it about clearer decision rights? You talked a little bit about the thought of, treating IT and AI more as people or as teams, but how do we get this right when it comes to governance and how it should evolve, and also those stronger controls?
Yeah, I mean, clear decision rights have always been a good thing, right? I don't think that accountability point, as Anna and others have mentioned, is changes. I think in terms of controls, it's very context dependent around what's the level of risk, right? So regulation is mostly about risk and avoidance of bad outcomes. That's a overly simplistic way of putting it, but that's what regulation and regulated firms think about. So if you look at usage in industries in healthcare, which I've been involved in, the stakes are pretty high. So if you're looking at misdiagnosis, life impacts, or death, right? So the barriers to jump through for medically approved capabilities under regulations are very high. Computer vision ML has been supporting everyone's radiology pathology scans for years. Very much beats humans in consistent identification of anomalies, but the bar's been very high to get there, and you still need that human final decision maker associated with the outcomes. If you look at public sector, so government, so you could look at something like DWP, so Department of Work and Pensions. If you were to have wholesale errors in those spaces to people accessing their benefits or to pensions, you could be looking at recipes for civil unrest at the most extreme, or government toppling risks. So people might not die necessarily, but caution needs to be extremely high. And then you get into lower areas, so maybe using RAG in the legal profession. And yes, there are risks, but they could probably also be addressed. Harms can be reversed. In the blast area, radius of an error is comparatively small to, say, areas like kind of healthcare or public sector or military or what have you. So I don't think it's one size fits all. It's very much about what is the risk and impact for an industry and its customers, its citizens, its employees, etc. And whether it's scientific research or customer service or consulting professions, the risks and impacts of errors vary hugely. And so usage and limitations and controls need to do so as well. So I think governance will evolve. It will evolve differently based around the risk profile of those industries and organizations. And it sounds really oversimplifying, but I think it's just about being thoughtful. If you understand the risks of your area industry and what you're trying to do, and you understand the benefits and limitations of either traditional AI and ML or in generative AI constructs, then you can make those calls accordingly based upon the risk appetite and the likely impacts that you'd have to contend with. So again, it's probably not actually that much different from what we've had to do before, but you have to have a really solid understanding of what those risks or the fallibilities of AI might be. And also the challenge being it's moving so fast that you need to keep continuously educated and continuously informed, because if you spend a year trying to make a decision, you've got to be mindful that you might need to modify that decision in 6 months as the market radically moves on.
Yeah, thank you. And that sometimes feels even faster, doesn't it, in the 6 months, and then you put in political unrest, put in economic unrest, societal, and into sustainability and so on. It's an incredibly difficult world for those boards to actually be dealing in. If we look at central banking, Lars, and we look at sustainable procurement and financial market infrastructure, what's been harder? Has it been modernising the technology stack or shifting decision rights and behaviours?
That's a very good question. So I would say shifting behavior. So I have a strong ability to see the big picture and often then identifying issues. And I'm not talking about the LSEG here. I would say I'm talking about banking, financial services from that perspective. When I'm in a bank, I often see the big problems, and I can then see that when I describe those problems, people are not reacting in the way that would be good for the bank as such. They often reacting based upon their position, their career, their how they think about that technology, etc. So from that perspective, it's people who is the biggest challenge. Getting people to understand the importance of something and having them to look at that then from the perspective of the organization and not from their own position. Then if it comes to technology, the problem we have there is mostly hype, I would say. I've seen countless examples where we have a clearly described problem. The vendors comes in and they then replay how they have solved those problems in other places, in other companies. And people are then, instead of asking, how did you solve that? What was the outcome? How did it go? Instead, they ask, does it support Python? Can it support Java? And you can see the vendor, how they feel, oh, not this question again. I had it so many times. So I would say people and hypes are today the biggest challenges when it comes to transforming financial services or regulated industries like that. Did that answer your question, or yeah?
It does. Thank you very much indeed. I'd quite like to, if Anna doesn't mind, sort of look at Unibloom and look at how you move from AI insights to AI agents actively and how those are shaping operational decisions. You sort of alluded to that a little bit earlier on, but also what the fundamental changes are when AI begins making real-time decisions that impact both decision outcomes and also sustainability goals. So an awful lot going on. The world that we live in is so volatile at the moment. It changes all the time. And at board level, it's so tricky to actually make those real-time decisions. And as we've been talking about, some can wait and wait and wait. As Alexandra was saying, we can't wait a year on these decisions. How are we actually moving, and how are you moving as an organization and with your customers from those AI insights to AI agents?
Thank you, Emma. I would also reframe like AI, AI prompting, where I just ask questions or ask like finding things in the system with some simple AI, toolbox on the side or the copilot. But what I see is that we need to have the agents that help you to make the right choices. I would still not really rely that you make the decision for you, but they can make the choices that probably, drive you towards the least risky option, right? And also the risk of inaction. So that's what we really, are moving towards, is to bring in cost, carbon, functionality, and like the risk of inaction and the regulatory environment. So you can pull all these kind of different levers together, which is really hard. We know, I spoke to over 60 CEOs the last 3 months, and they said, I'm just doing a lot of decisions on guesswork regarding, everything around climate. My God. So what we see is that, we see the hundreds of possible interventions they can do, like everything from changing feed ingredients, switching packaging materials, transport modes. You can imagine how many inputs and how many teams like coming with their different suggestions or investing in energy systems. But tackle that in a more structured way to evaluate the different trade-offs and priorities are one of the things, like on both cost, emissions, risk, and operational feasibility. Those are the things that like needs to innovate in a new way. And I really like that, like that's where the agents coming in, and we truly see what we forced, pushed through a broken system the last 6 months, how those AI agents, together with my expert from Oxford University, a data science officer, has worked in the space for 10 years, together with my business knowledge, where we said like it's a broken system, decision system and analysis system, and can, beyond just insights or kind of the prompting, help the user to move to agents that can help you to give the choices. Because usually you want to drill down to a few different choices. We have different parameters that sits usually in different departments. Now we can pull them all together in one coherent view. And we tried it with Perplexity, we tried it with ChatGPT, we tried it with everything. It doesn't work. So we see that it's specific trained agents for a specific task that needs to come in to the organization. That's where we kind of, I think it was Larsåke or Alexander who mentioned that, like, it is around not just technology, it's about the people's workflow that we're coming in and improve them. So that's where it's like, don't be afraid of implementing it, but trust what you're doing and how you do it. So that's where we say that it's not just simply adding AI, it's the combination of this decision data that we know that needs to be pulled together from governance, like risk and all that, from cost and those factors, and, for example, the planet factors. Then that agent will take that, model that, and give you the choices, right? And that's where we see that it's not just about AI prompting and say, oh, that will solve our decision making forward. It's really about having the right agents, the right team, and making those kind of more efficient by those agents that are trained upon those specific workflows, if it makes sense.
Thank
so
you.
That's what we're building. And that's where it's like, okay, ChatGPT is beautiful when you do bouncing and have some. I do use it every day in Perplexity and going to Claude like every single morning. But we're then looking at different options and really having kind of the thought process through a very complex question. I do believe that you need much better trained and specific trained models, like the Legora. When Claude launched, their latest model, Legora here in Sweden, said, we know what the lawyers need. We know exactly the workflows and the problems that are much more trained with our agents than the, very broad solution. Yeah, if that makes sense. But so that's where I say, like, that's where the agents coming in, where we have the human behind this that actually work and sits. That's where the value, the moat coming in with the technology that Unibloom provide, the solution and the customer with. And I think that's also where it's also like, it is about the solutions and really highlighting the problems that we're trying to solve for these customers. And we know it's huge and it costs a lot of money if they don't start to transform. Yeah, very engaged on the topic. But I was like, let's get it going, but trust the ones that really know the topic.
Yeah, absolutely. And as AI increasingly makes operational decisions, Anna, how do you ensure it supports human judgment rather than oversimplifying complex trade-offs between business performance and sustainability goals? It's a lot to be juggling there.
Yeah. One of the things is that what we decided very early on was to have a confidence score. Like, how confident is this data behind the recommendation, right? So we have evaluated that again with humans behind it, with our Dr. Johnson, who is our chief data scientist and science officer, who's kind of coming from Oxford, done that for 10 years in a more manual way. So what are the decision layers and all that is coming in? So I would say that that's kind of making the trade-offs transparent, of hiding them behind one single answer is one of the things. So I would say human judgment usually are influenced also by, oh, that's a very strong person. They probably have more strong rights, right? I heard it so many times. Like, that department, transportation, we probably should do something there. But because it's a harder topic to go into change materials or ingredients, and we don't really have the data, so I don't have the confidence. But suddenly, the agents can provide you with that information as good as the transportation calculations. So then suddenly you sit on a very kind of equal for equal analysis in different topics in your organization. So that brings you kind of the non-complexity that might be very, very much complex because you can't get the data, for example, for tier 2, tier 3 suppliers. But now suddenly we can provide that because we have to, again, I highlighted that without the data, the agents are not good and the AI is not good. But if you can provide them, so we have a combination, and that's my recommendation also to everyone who's listening, is to look at all the providers, like the Unibloom has built a system on data and agents. And that's kind of where many, many companies lack the data. So they're scrabbling and chasing and spending time on that. But like, no, maybe you can start with some data and get some informed insights. And then you have the confidence level score that we built into the system based upon a very scientific model. And then you say, okay, this is a very low confidence score level. So maybe we should, research this a bit more. Shall we talk to a few suppliers? Shall we look into what candidate that we're missing here? So you give that guidance along the way that gives you that more confidence on how you can say, okay, this is very high confident level data. This is what the agent can, trust. And that's why we can trust this recommendation.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Alexander, when it comes to the AI increasingly making those operational decisions, looking at in terms of business to performance, how do you feel, or what do you see on the ground? How do we get this human judgment supported effectively rather than just oversimplifying those complex tasks? If we take the sustainability side out, what are your thoughts on that?
So there's an interesting kind of question, I think, kind of coming down the line for organizations. So I think particularly in terms of kind of personal productivity. So again, I agree that the data quality is key. Understanding what data you're consuming is kind of key. And if you're using AI to support an individual or team in their role, you can definitely get a kind of improvement in performance. But that human in the loop kind of concept, that where the final decision making element comes in, is particularly interesting, because that can only be done if you've got people in the organization who have tenure and experience and knowledge. So you tend to have your more senior or more long-standing in that industry or in that organization individuals getting huge boosts in terms of performance and productivity about what they're able to contribute, because they can lean into whether it's generic or kind of trained agents or kind of just good RAG AI, and become incredibly more productive. The knock-on effect from that, however, is that and there was some really interesting research, I think, from Gartner, and they looked at about 250,000 jobs or something, that what firms are doing is looking at new hires or grad hires or more inexperienced hires and either resisting or even kind of freezing some hires because they're able to extract more productivity using this tool sets with their more experienced staff, which sounds absolutely fantastic until you wind the clock forward 5-10 years and those people retire and they leave other organizations. And then all the machines are there, but all the people who can assess their validity and their usefulness are no longer there. So you may run risks of talent wars, kind of pricing wars. So if you are in that kind of tenured, experienced person in industry which is readily using AI, you're going to be possibly looking for a nice wage bump in about 5-10 years time as people start to compete for your services. So there's a big interesting element, I think, for organizations on that space, which is that yes, you definitely can do that, right? So still very much have the decisions, the calls being made within the boundaries of control for those experienced staff and those experienced teams, but also cast an eye 5 to 10 years down the line, because as those teams start to move on or you start to see retirement, where is the human expertise and intuition and experience which is going to be providing you that accountability, that oversight, validation? Because the machinery will still be there, but now that safety net, that accountability might start to get thinner. So I think that that's probably the more interesting angle to it, is that when you go further down the line, the benefits that you've reaped and your ability to reduce costs by not having to hire so much actually might come back to bite organizations. So I think deliberate focus on talent pipeline for those decision makers, those approvers, authorizers of AI activities, needs to be a deliberate part of any kind of people or organizational talent management strategy.
I think that's very interesting. Thank you, because we so often think that technology loses talent, but actually, as you said, we need to really consider that there is going to be the bite. Lars, at the London Stock Exchange Group, decisions carry systemic financial consequences. How does that reality shape your tolerance for AI, autonomy, and indeed risk? Because you're very exposed as an organization.
Yeah.
How is that reality looking for you?
Yes. So once again, my own private view, but it's shaping us very much. So we have a very strict governance function. They review every request for using AI. Those solutions are then sort of reviewed, as you said, from a risk perspective. And there's a combination of the information AI applied on we have AI applied on data that goes to our customers, but we also have AI that is used internally for our own processes. And there we have another, what to say, we have a higher acceptance of how AI is used, but we have to balance the risk appetite with being able to continuously enhance our products with using AI. We can't move too fast because that might cause, as you said, problems for our customers. So that's why we have this strict governance function. But coming back to also to what I think I would like to say that Alexander said, and Anna also said, that by using small focused models, you can increase your level of trust in what decisions that they're making. So I can see a boardroom in front of myself where you have those focused models or agents which you can ask for, like, what is the status of product X? What is the status of the process Y? And you know that the information, the reply you get back is something you can trust. And suddenly you have a boardroom which is driven by AI. But it's also, as Alexander said, it's depends on the, and I'm not also, it's dependent on the data. Bad data is bad decisions. So I think no matter how we turn ourselves, we're always coming back to the data is key for our organization going forward. But I would also like to say that it's the same as Alexander. I've seen the huge potential problem in the future, that if organizations are not careful, when they start replacing people with AI and processes, suddenly they lost the knowledge that is required to evaluate whether that was correct or not. And if you then play forward 10 years, suddenly you are sitting there without those people, and it might take you 2 or 3 years to train someone to get that knowledge. And how do you do that when you don't have the experienced people left? Before, it was like, if you go back in history, where we were sitting on the Stone Age, we were transferring knowledge from one by telling stories, and the same is in our business. We are telling people, this is how you do it, this is how it works. Are you feeling confident now? Can I hand it over to you? But if we have an agent sitting there working on solving something, and suddenly you feel that you lost confidence in that, how do you do that? How do you get that knowledge back again?
Absolutely.
Yes,
I mean,
yeah,
it's interesting. When I started doing this 23 years ago, it was about the knowledge management side of things. How did we retain this knowledge? And it always feels a little bit of a full cycle, doesn't it? Anna, I think you were going to say something.
I just want to highlight again that, we can't see that AI is replacing, the human judgment, but it's structure, the complexity of the decisions that us as humans can make. And what we can do with them is to give help us to give more clarity, less guesswork, and more speed. And that's what we need. So I think, yes, want to highlight that again. That's where we see that it gives us better judgment, but it won't say that it will replace it. And just to highlight that again, but we shouldn't be afraid to implement it.
Thank you, Anna, very much indeed. Alexander, I think the interesting thing that we've looked at over the period of time of running the community is that we have different types of organizations. The commercial organizations, where they, in this point in time, will see AI experimentations driving advantage. But for public sector institutions, it must preserve stability and trust for their citizens, for wider society, and so on. How do you feel that different shapes their appetite, and indeed your appetite, for AI experimentation?
Yeah, so I think in many respects it's not that different. So if you look at good experimentation, good innovation, it's scientific method at the end of the day. You identify your outcomes, you develop hypotheses, assumptions, you kind of test those. Depending on the validity or invalidity, you pivot, course correct, continue or stop. And I don't think that differs. Kind of good practice in terms of experimentation, innovation, discipline is the same in both public and private. I think the variation maybe for public organizations, and I would expect for a lot of regulators as well, is, they don't live in a vacuum. And so they need to understand what's going on in their ecosystem. So if you are maybe it's not a timely example, but if you're the regulator for, say, the water companies, and you want to understand what they're looking to use in terms of their technology and the potential benefits it might bring, and the cost management elements of it, you do actually need to understand how it works. How can you regulate firms when you don't understand how they practice? So some of the AI work that I would expect across all public sector areas will be much about learning without necessarily looking to take a product to market. So if you look at there's a big paradigm shift, and it used to be with Google, and now it's with chatbots for people using, kind of GPT, etc., and OpenAI for kind of therapy, right? So for kind of self-counseling, so to speak. And I'm not saying that a public health system would necessarily even want to take a product or service like that to market. It might. But it does need to know what's going on. It does need to know how that's working. It does need to know what sorts of problems is that stacking up for the health system in the future, and that would be the same across other industries. So I think within public sector, the experimentation element is probably the same, different set of outcomes. As you say, it's about stability and trust rather than growth or new markets or new products and services. But there's probably, strangely, a much more interested learning for the sake of understanding your environment. That might need to go on in public sector organizations versus commercial, even though a lot of commercials will want to do that as well. And I think that's probably the main dividing line, is that, you need to be very informed. And sometimes to be informed, you've actually got to be able to run experiments yourself. Otherwise, you don't really know what the organizations that you collaborate with or people that you support are actually doing.
Yeah. And it's encouraging that trial and tribulation that goes with it, isn't it? You see some saying, let's rein it in. We've had too much chat GPT being used by employees, and others saying, right, you need to use it more. And we've got others saying leadership need to be trialing and testing and so on. So there's a constant sort of noise, if you like, about what is the right answer and how do we get there. If I can come to all of you as we start to close on your thoughts. AI models are becoming more autonomous and influential. Where should leadership deliberately draw the line, and who ultimately owns that line? More of an ethics question. Can I come to you, Anna, please?
Yep. I think we've spoken about this through this session now, but draw the line with, where judgment, values, and accountability are involved, right? And I would say in the leadership team, of course, it's the CEO and it's the chairman of the board, and then of course it is every single manager's responsibility as such. You can't just lean on it, but like if you go from the top to the bottom, it has to be on the top, the guidance, the structure, and all that. The AI shall analyze the patterns, simulate the scenarios, and optimize decisions, but it doesn't really understand the strategic course or the context enough sometimes. And that's where, the risk tolerance, the ethics around it, of course, they can judge it and read it. You can say, this is my personality. This is kind of our company's values. How would you judge this? But like these kind of long-term relationships and brand impact, these are things that, should be judged also partly. You can still have the co-pilot and the bouncing back and forth, but I would say that's the ultimate thing. So the leaders, they just do two things that has to be on the board level and on the leadership step every single week and month is around the trusted data and the foundation of that to kind of improve and work on that, and then set the guardrails, which we have done in our system. We're very clear where it has hallucinate if you don't put the guardrails in place. And that's the same, a bit like, the judgment and leadership for itself, putting the guardrails. Where do we go and where don't go? So I think that's kind of making sure that we have the guardrails, that you can make sure that the agency you implement has those guardrails. As I said, I've done a system where we going opposite to what AI is. So we say like we need to put the guardrails, and that's the same with the leadership team. They have this ultimate accountability for the decisions that are made. You shouldn't blame, a system or an agent where they did it. So I would say that's where both the board and the leadership has this, the values, the accountability are two of the core things where they have to, make it in them. So choices are really great on getting from the agents, but then the decision making in itself would be kind of part of that.
Thank you very much indeed. Lars, your thoughts?
Yeah, so first in LSEG, we have a very clear what I say, definition of responsibilities, both internally and to our customers, the standards we should uphold, how we work with, and also how we then work with AI. And this is continuously evolving, as Alexander and Anna have said, it's moving very, very quick, but we are working then to always be on top of this. I think this is a fast-moving landscape, but we're always coming back to we are humans, we are working with humans, and we as leaders have to use AI in a way that our colleagues understand what we're talking about, and that so they're making the right decisions, both for ourselves and for our customer's sake. And I think it is this understanding that you cannot trust AI completely. You have to apply your own common sense and to make the right decisions.
Thank you so much. Alexander, to come to you as well, in terms of that leadership, where do they draw the line?
Yeah, I think it does come back to what's been said before, is that, you know, there has to be a decision maker or a leader ultimately in play. And if an organization has modeled and mapped its processes and where decisions get made and how they get made, what are the parameters for those decisions, whether it's around the value of an investment or blah, or whatever else it may be. Mm-hmm. You need to lay the same out for your AI effectively. I wouldn't discount the possibility that organizations might want to consider, again, thinking of the AI, generative AI and the agents to some extent as people or as extensions of people. You may want to consider putting it on your org chart. And if you can look on your org chart and see that I would trust this team, this division, or this person, or this committee with that decision, they have the parameters around using AI activities for making that decision. They still make the decision, but, you know, they can control it within that scope. So you don't want to have either extreme evangelists saying it will solve every problem in the world, or extreme alarmists saying it's going to destroy the universe to dominate those sorts of conversations. You need to make the appropriate decision based on the capability or fallibility of AI, just alongside you with every other technology, but maybe look at it through the lens of which group, person, team, individual would I authorize with that? And so that their level of decision authority cannot be exceeded by any AI they're using to kind of support it. They can just be fundamentally more informed and supported by it. So you're really using it to mirror your decision-making model versus to necessarily disrupt it.
Thank you very much indeed. So a huge thank you to all the lots that we have covered, and it's very, very complex. But as I think Anna said, you know, we do have to start from somewhere. A big thank you, Lars, to you as well. We've got to look at that. The architecture that sits under, we've got to look at the governance, we've got to understand what the impact is across all of these things. We've got to remember that there needs to be a human in the loop as well as an agent in the loop. And also when it comes, Alexander, to all the aspects of leadership and people and culture and change and the transformation ongoing all the time. We've never really reached the end point, do we? How do we make sure we're thinking about it? Particularly, I think, as you said, when it came to that 5 to 10 year plan, when it comes to talent pools, where are we going? We all want to cost save at the moment. The markets are tricky, but actually we do need to look further forward than to the next 6 months. So big thank you to all for some really strong insight. Anna, to you, to Lars and to Alexander for your time this morning and for a really interesting and thoughtful discussion. I think all of us take a lot away from this. We'll be posting the recording from today's session onto our YouTube channel, but also onto chiefdisruptor.com, onto our monthly Chief Disruptor Insights newsletter, and also across our LinkedIn channels. So please do feel free to share it. Hope it's been useful to you and indeed to colleagues. And we look forward to seeing you again at some of our forthcoming activities. Thank you all very much indeed again.